Hello again, and welcome to our Good to Know Food Safety series, where we're focusing on keeping our food supply safer throughout the entire life cycle, from growing to processing to manufacturing and ultimately even to consumption. I'm Jim McCann with PathoSans, sitting in for our normal host, Ken Campbell. Today, we're focusing on the manufacturing portion of that life cycle and the unique challenges that producers face as it relates to keeping their facilities sanitized and their products safe. So I'd like to welcome back Dr. Darin Detwiler to the show. Darin, good to see you again.
Great to see you too.
Can you give a very brief intro for anyone who is new to our series?
Sure, thank you. I am a professor and an author, an advocate, and an advisor within the food industry. I've had over 30 years of experience, uh, not only with the USDA but the FDA in terms of supporting the changes in policy that we've seen literally over the last 3 decades. And as a professor, I've had a great opportunity to not only help students get into the food industry, but also those who are transitioning to leadership roles.
Excellent. Well, again, thanks for being here today. Also joining us is Tyler Williams, who leads the scientific services and product engineering teams here at PathoSans. Tyler, welcome, and can you give us a brief intro?
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, as you said, I'm Director of Scientific Services here at PathoSans, so I oversee our regulatory arm, our quality assurance group, and R&D. What I'm excited to talk about today is kind of how technology is being implemented and the processes within manufacturing and how those can be used to help food safety. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, excellent. So, Darin, I'm gonna jump right in. It seems like food safety only comes up when something bad happens, right? And proof of that is this most recent listeria outbreak, which is it's all over the news. Um, if you could start out by just talking about the importance of being proactive and trying to stay ahead of fighting pathogens for, again, anywhere through this food safety life cycle.
You make a really good observation. Pretty much my entire experience within food safety has been exactly that. No one talks about it until there's a need to talk about it. But I think we need to talk about it all the time. The experience I had with the recent Netflix documentary that came out last year, it was pretty much one of the only times where people were talking about food safety, and it wasn't after a major event, a major outbreak, a major recall, someone's been harmed. And it almost, kind of caught me off guard. But the reality is that this is something we need to be talking about all the time. We don't only put on a seatbelt when we're in an accident. We act proactively in other situations as well. We look both ways before we cross the street every time, right? And the most, I think, significant value that can come from this more proactive way of focusing on food safety, not just after the fact, is the immense importance and, quite honestly, the value of being proactive. If we can mitigate a problem before it goes into commerce, not only are we going to save money, but we're going to reduce, if not eliminate, liabilities, right? The idea that no one became harmed from this product because we stopped it before it got out into the shelves, it got into the market. But there's also, we could look at it in terms of reputation. We could look at it in terms of legal consequences. There's so many different ways that we can look at the value of being proactive in this context. And I think the most important thing is that we have to realize that, when we talk about outbreaks and recalls, almost every case is initiated after someone's become harmed. So again, the extreme value in being proactive. And yeah, we can't predict everything, but we can never do that if we don't try. So it's a great value to always be looking at this and not only be waiting until after the fact.
Yeah, and quite frankly, that kind of that proactive view or being an advocate of being proactive is really the primary reason we've engaged with you, and that's why I'm so glad you're able to join us today. So,
Thank you.
Tyler, as we kind of shift gears and jump into the manufacturing end of things, from raw ingredients to the cleaning of equipment. I mean, I would guess manufacturers have some of the same challenges um, that every other part of the supply chain has, and some challenges that are different. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges you've seen?
Absolutely, Jim. So when we talk about food safety and we think about food preparation in general, everyone likes to think of, what's closest to them. Their kitchen, right? They think of cutting boards, they think of stovetops, countertops, a knife here or there. But what's really where the challenge really scales up is when we start to think about these industrial manufacturers, when we start putting food in giant tanks and tubing and piping that are miles and miles long, all necessary to support the supply chain and the demand from the world and the global food need. But we start talking about tubing that literally could be football fields in length that we can't see the inside of, conveyors that are moving feet a second, maybe even faster than that to assure we're getting the right output of the food product. And in that, we start to build a lot of harborage sites, a lot of sites that you and I, or a general user, cannot see, um, where there's plenty of food because it's a food manufacturing site for bacteria to grow. There may be light or other sources that allow growth to happen. And usually it's at a very comfortable temperature because that's necessary for the food to be made in. So we start to see these areas that can harbor bacteria, are very difficult to catch, and are very difficult to identify unless there's a very robust program in place. And you'll see these large manufacturers, whether it's bottling, dairy, bakery, that invest a large amount of money to be proactive and be ahead of these issues. And that's usually in the form of a SSOP, or Standard Sanitation Operating Procedure. These have very strict requirements and have validation and verification procedures built into that. And really what that means is these groups are verifying and validating that their process is being done and it is indeed working. There's plenty of unique techniques now. The industry's really evolved to have rapid identification of either a protein or a bacteria, so these food manufacturers can act and react very quickly and address any issues.
Excellent. So, Tyler, you were part to just kind of keep going down that
Mm-hmm.
thread. You were part of a discussion. Actually, you were both part of a discussion at Indoor AgCon earlier this year, and you went into some great detail, Tyler, about biofilms and the challenges biofilms pose. Both at that time it was indoor growing, but I would suspect it's the same in the manufacturing process as well.
Oh, absolutely. Biofilms are kind of the new bug on the street, if you will, or they seem to be getting a lot more attention. That's a great thing because biofilms cause a lot of harborage sites that are not visible to the naked eye. So what's really occurring with biofilms is as bacteria dies or protein sugars build up on the surface, there becomes a micro layer. So if we imagine that tube we were talking about earlier that maybe transfers a liquid from one holding tank to another holding tank or bottling line, uh, they can build up a very thin layer of these sugars, of dead bacteria, of fats and oils, and create a harborage site. So when a disinfection procedure comes through, it's possible that there's a greater amount of surviving bacteria that can then recontaminate the surface after the fact. So a lot of effort and investment has been put into identifying, removing, and validating that we've removed those biofilms now in these large scale applications.
So, Darren, I want to go back to you for a second. Tyler mentioned, SSOPs and, kind of great lengths that sanitation's teams go to keep their facilities clean. Um, but, manufacturers struggle with turnover like any other business, right? Um, do you have any tips or suggestions on how they can help keep that continuity in their cleaning processes?
This is one of those age old questions. We deal with this, and I think that kind of like how we look at with social media and the internet, information increases at a much more rapid pace than it did in the past. I think that with today's food manufacturing and the speed with which we do this, there's so much more information. There's so much more specifics, especially when a company is manufacturing multiple different types of products, right? Tyler, you were talking about the indoor ag. There we're talking about let's say we're talking about leafy greens. Most people don't cook leafy greens, so there's
Mm.
a culture around that in terms of the idea that the cooking is a kill step. You have companies. I recall this one company where they have ready to eat foods, they have canned foods, they have frozen foods. There's so many different things going on. It's almost as if each different line of food has its own culture. How does someone work and keep up with all that? And how do we deal with that turnover? I would think that perhaps the best way to look at it is to think of not just these are procedures, these are the protocols, these are the SSOPs, but the idea of let's look at the worker in terms of you have to have awareness. We get that. They have to have awareness of the issues. They have to have awareness of what are the specifics for that specific area or production line that they're working on, right? But they also have to realize that they need to have allies within their own specific work team, allies within leadership and supervisors. How does that alliance work? How do they support each other? And sometimes that becomes difficult, especially when you have everything from supervisors who are in the back office, not actually there on the floor, or sometimes you have language and cultural barriers that are going on. Beyond that, when we have a stronger alliance, which of course has to start with the awareness, now we can have advocacy. The idea that you're not just doing your own job, but you can see something or say something, and we see this in other aspects of our life. If you see that there's something going on, even if it's not your responsibility, or if you see that someone you're working with doesn't properly know how to, whether it is wear their gloves or use that sanitizer or take that step, if there is a familiarity and a culture that supports the idea of within that alliance, people talking with each other, then when we have this concern over turnover, it's not every man for themselves. It is this idea of within our group of allies, we can support the newest person to the team. We can support the team member who is transitioning from one team to another team. And we can try to make sure, I think finally, that it's not about external motivation, that idea of do this or you're going to get fired. But with this better awareness and alliance, it's a little bit more along the lines of, I agree with the fact that we don't want to sell food that can harm someone. And if I were to eat this, or if I were to serve this to my own family, I don't want anyone to be harmed. So I am internally inspired to make sure that this food is as safe as possible. That's where you're going to have that transition from awareness to allies to advocacy that will cut through any kind of issues with turnover like this.
Darin, you bring up a really great point too. And another challenge you kind of brought to light as well is time. A lot of these procedures on these industrial facilities have to happen very quick, because if those machines are down, they're losing production or they're losing quotas. And unless you have those allies and you have that buy-in throughout the entire organization that wants to do the right thing to make sure, if they were to serve it to their own families, I like what you said there. They're proud to serve this food to their own families. You can run into a lot of issues where people are cutting corners or mixing chemicals that shouldn't be mixed to get the job done in a faster amount of time, and really compromising or risking other areas of safety to get that done. So those allies are very critical to the success of a good program and the overall really industry.
Yeah, Darin, the other thing you touched on for me as a marketing professional is the impact on the brand and the great lengths that companies should go to stay out of the news cycle for the wrong reasons. Um, I would venture to guess that weighs heavily on any corporate executive, um, because you don't get many chances. You don't get many bites at that apple to be negatively impacted by the press. What You probably have countless examples of how that brand impression is suffered from negative press. Can you talk about that as maybe a motivator?
Oh, sure. um, 30 years, more than 30 years of looking at this, I almost see the same exact pattern every single time there is an outbreak or recall. Someone from fill in the blank company, a representative, a CEO, or a lawyer in some cases, says the same things. We do prioritize food safety, but we're going to reinforce. We're going to reinvest in our priority of food safety, and we're going to put someone in charge of this, and we're going to look at our training. We're going to go back and do this. And I always think, why weren't they doing that all along? Why weren't they always reinvesting in food safety? Why weren't they always reevaluating their protocols and their training? Why weren't they always making sure there was someone in charge of this, and making these statements, making these pledges to their consumers about how safe their product is? I've heard everything from, well, our lawyers get in the way, to our marketing team gets in the way. We want to have words that sound exciting, like food with integrity, or food that's good. It's like, okay, but those are great words, but how about safe food? How about those kind of things? Well, safe food, that implies that our food wasn't safe before. There's this sense that if we talk about food safety all the time, that maybe there'll be this fatigue about the idea of food being safe. We should have an assumption that food is safe. The reality is, not all food is the same. We tend to look at food as, if it's on the shelf, it has to have gone through some testing. This is the cream of the crop. We tend to look at in terms of, oh, this is a big name. This is a name that, brand name that's been around for a long time. But the reality is that these problems, whether it's a pathogen or whether there's a failure in sanitation, these issues don't discriminate. It doesn't matter if it is an expensive piece of food. It doesn't matter if it's a long-standing company name. These issues happen with every single company, and it's all up to the company in terms of how they deal with these issues. And of course, by the time someone is at their home, like Tyler was talking about, this is one of those things where consumers aren't thinking about these things. They just make certain assumptions. So we have to think about manufacturing food in terms of the idea of not only our reputation, not only about regulatory compliance, but it's almost like we have to think about our consumers, people who are going to make the assumptions that we do all these things, even if they're not asking those questions.
Darin, I have to comment on that a little bit too, because I feel you hit the microbiologist in me as well. Everything is evolving, so what may be the same one day may be different the other, and that includes the organisms we're up against for food safety. Those are trying to change and survive as well, and if we're not evolving our processes and we're staying where we're at, we're going to be saying we're going to go back and reinvest a lot more. I find some of the best programs are those that are thinking ahead, always challenging their status quo and looking at what could we be doing better? How could we be doing this faster, quicker, more frequently? And those are the programs that really start to build on the integrity and the global look at food safety.
Great point. There are concerns that we were not talking about 3 decades ago that we talk about today. Mm-hmm. And even the concerns we were talking about 3 decades ago, when we were talking about E. coli, when we were talking about certain things, we were only talking about them with certain foods. Now we're talking about them with a whole range of other foods. 30 years ago, we never talked about like ice cream. We never talked about certain, foods. We just made the assumption that, this is only as a problem when it comes to these situations, these specific kinds of foods. But we have to realize that, like you said, the food manufacturing of today is different than the food manufacturing of 30 years ago. And we can probably say that 5 years from now, that there are new challenges, there are new procedures, there are new technologies. And with every new change, whether it's a great disruptor, right? The idea of new opportunities, new flavors, new characteristics, new markets, that kind of a thing. With each of these new elements comes new challenges, new risks, and new responsibilities from everyone who works from from maintenance, sanitation to food safety and quality assurance, and quite honestly, even um, financing and security and distribution and warehousing, you name it. Every single player, and of course there's turnover in each of those roles. Every single player has new challenges every time there's any kind of change to the food that we're eating.
So that's all. That's a very, very good discussion. What I'd like to do now is bring it back down, maybe to manufacturing a little more specifically. Tyler, I know, in customers we have, right, whether they use CIP or clean in place processes, or COP or clean out of place. Um, cleaning and sanitizing is paramount to all of their processes and procedures. And there are many different ways to end up with a clean and sanitized surface and clean and sanitized equipment. Can you two things? One, can you talk about some of the options in how manufacturers can keep their facilities and equipment safe, and in that, could you also elaborate a little bit on the testing that some of these companies do to prove that they are clean and sanitized?
Absolutely, absolutely. So one of the best leading processes is clean first, then sanitize or disinfect. Now, depending on the regulation, sanitation is the first step in removing bacteria. That's usually sufficient for a food manufacturer. And then there's the next tier of disinfection, which covers viruses and things beyond that, and kind of a steeper kill claim. But for the sake of this discussion, we'll stick with cleaning and disinfecting. So why clean first? Why have another chemical? Why have that in your facility? Well, it's to remove all the unwanted matter, that protein, that sugar, that fat, that oil that we talked about earlier that can help build a house for bacteria to hide in. We have to remove that. We need to have that do the heavy lifting and get down to the surface that touches the food. From there, we need to follow up with a sanitizer, and that's our insurance policy. Chemicals like that need to come through, be proven to kill bacteria, be regulated by the right government agencies, in this case the EPA, like our on-site devices are. Remove that bacteria, and then the surface is ready to be validated that it was clean, or verified that it was sanitized. So when we start talking about how to prove that, is where we kind of shift to what are we looking for. In the case of the example we just gave, we tried to remove proteins. That's a very easy one. There's swabs now that exist, and for a very quick test, it can tell you the level of soil load still remaining on that surface. So it's key for your program to select a high-risk surface or representative surface, swab that area, and within, I believe it's a 15-minute incubation period, you'll have a go, no-go swab that tells you if you cleaned 4 proteins, specifically allergen targets. From there, same swab, maybe further down, can also be swabbed for bacteria or ATP, depending on the process. I know for food manufacturing, it can be a challenge. If you find bacteria, you have to report you found bacteria and do a recall. But if you're looking for ATP and your ATP is low enough, you know that the surface is cleaned and sanitized, and you can move forward unless other regulatory pressures exist.
Excellent. That's really good information there.
I think, we talked about turnover before, and one of the things that always, I guess, worries me is everything that Tyler just talked about. We're talking about things that are invisible, except for perhaps physical contamination, but even then, if it's in food, it's kind of invisible. But when you're looking at biological, chemical, and allergen hazards, this is something that no one can see. You have to have not only adequate sanitation and cleaning, but also testing. And far too often, when you don't have that understanding of the why right? What can happen if we don't verify that it's allergen free? What can happen if we don't verify that it is not having those biofilms or there's not other chemicals? Not only can we be basically uh, uh, not only can we basically be operating such that there's a lack of awareness in terms of how consumers can be impacted, but even employees. There are certain hazards, chemical and allergen, that can impact employees in the actual food manufacturing facility. In addition to the fact that, obviously, especially with pathogens and allergens, how consumers can become impacted, and nothing is more visible than the long term down the road consequences. So there has to be not only the training in how to use the right resources, how to validate the effectiveness of those solutions, but also the why. Why do we do this? What will happen if we don't do this?
I think, Darin, you triggered kind of another piece of that as well, is what happens on the overcorrection side of it.
Mm.
So we start talking about, or we're starting to talk about chemicals and how to use them and the proper training and why we're doing it a certain way. Thinking through that, what happens when we start saying, well, if a little bit kills the bacteria, let's use a lot. And now we start talking about scorching the earth with chemicals and leaving behind chemical residues in our food, on the surfaces. And it's really doing too much work in an overcorrection to the right thing. And I think that really just echoes with what you said. We need to know the why and make sure that the validation, the process, and the training are supporting the why.
Good. That's great. Great information. Thank you both. So, with that, I'd like to thank you for joining us today as we try to bring more awareness to what it takes to keep our food safe. If you have any questions for our two guests, you'll see Darin Detwiler's and Tyler Williams' emails on screen. So please don't hesitate to reach out to them or anyone at PathoSans directly for more information. Again, thanks for joining us, and we hope you agree that this information is good to know.